John Matthews sat cross-legged on the plush carpet, gently bouncing 6-month-old Casper on his knee, while Camille lounged on the leather sofa nearby, her laptop finally closed after another demanding day at the marketing firm. "Look at those little hands," John said, watching Casper's tiny fingers grasp at the air. "I bet he's already thinking about blueprints and calculations. Future engineer, right here." Camille rolled her eyes playfully. "Are you serious? Look at the way he moves. So fluid, so expressive. He's going to be an artist, John. I can already picture him with a paintbrush in those little hands." "Engineer," John insisted, lifting Casper higher. "He's got the Matthews analytical mind. Watch this." He held up his phone, showing Casper a video of a bridge construction. The baby's eyes tracked the moving machinery with apparent fascination. "That proves nothing," Camille laughed, sliding down to join them on the floor. "Babies are curious about everything. Besides, look at how he responds to music." She hummed softly, and Casper turned toward her voice, his face lighting up with a toothless grin. Okay, John chuckled, "but when he's designing skyscrapers, don't come crying to me." "When he's having his first gallery opening, I'll save you a front row seat." Camille shot back, then leaned over to kiss Casper's forehead. "Won't we, little artist?" Their playful banter filled the apartment with warmth. But as John looked at his wife, really looked at her, he noticed the subtle signs of exhaustion she tried to hide. The slight shadows under her eyes, the way she unconsciously rubbed her temples. At 45, they'd both worked tirelessly to build their careers, and starting a family had been a dream deferred for years while they climbed corporate ladders. "You know what?" John said, his voice softer now. "Whether he becomes an engineer, an artist, or decides to train dolphins for a living, it's going to be his choice." Camille smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Exactly. We'll just love him and support whatever path he chooses." The weight of parenthood had surprised them both. The sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the way every decision suddenly felt monumental. They'd imagined it would be challenging, but the reality was more intense than either had anticipated. "Speaking of choices," Camille said, glancing at her watch, "we should probably get ready. The nanny will be here soon." The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the mobile home, casting pale rectangles across the cramped interior. Paulina Rivera stood before the small mirror mounted on the particle board wall, carefully applying a coat of clear lip gloss. Her reflection stared back, olive skin, dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, and eyes that held a quiet confidence that seemed too old for her years. This was her day. After 3 weeks of back-and-forth emails and phone calls, she was finally going to meet the Matthews family in person. The excitement bubbled in her chest, not the nervous flutter she'd expected, but something deeper, more purposeful. When the agency had called to say they'd found a match for her experience, she'd felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name. Destiny, maybe, or simply the satisfaction of pieces falling into place. She smoothed down her simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, and grabbed her worn leather purse. The drive to the Matthews downtown loft would take 40 minutes from the trailer park on the outskirts of town, but she'd allowed herself plenty of time. First impressions mattered, and she intended to make a good one. The loft was even more impressive than she'd imagined from the address. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick, furniture that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Paulina took it all in without letting her expression change, though inwardly she catalogued every detail. The expensive coffee table books, the abstract art on the walls, the way the afternoon light made everything look like a magazine spread. "Paulina, thank you so much for coming," Camille said, extending her hand with a warm smile. She was exactly as Paulina had pictured from their phone conversation. Polished, professional, with laugh lines that suggested she didn't take herself too seriously. John appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Great to meet you in person. Can I get you some coffee? Water?" "Water would be lovely, thank you." Paulina replied, settling into the plush armchair they gestured toward. The fabric was soft beneath her fingers, probably cashmere. So, Camille began, leaning forward slightly, tell us a little about yourself. What do you like to do when you're not working? Paulina had rehearsed this answer, but she let it flow naturally. There's not much special about me, honestly. I'm an outdoor girl. Grew up in a small town about 2 hours north of here. I love hiking, spending time by the river, anything that gets me outside and moving. I think fresh air is important, especially for children. Nature teaches you things you can't learn indoors. John and Camille exchanged a quick glance. Approval, she thought. That's wonderful, Camille said. Now let's talk about the specifics. Casper is 6 months old, and I'll be honest with you, we've had 2 other nannies who didn't work out. He's particular about who he bonds with. Paulina noticed the careful way Camille chose her words, the slight tightness around her eyes. What didn't work with the previous nannies? Well, John said, running a hand through his hair. The first one was very experienced, came with excellent references, but Casper would cry whenever she tried to feed him or put him down for naps. The second one was younger, more energetic, but he seemed almost afraid of her. It was strange. Paulina nodded slowly, taking her time before responding. When she finally spoke, both John and Camille leaned forward slightly. Babies are more intuitive than we give them credit for, she said, her voice steady and warm. They can sense tension, uncertainty, even impatience. At 6 months, Casper is developing his own personality, his own preferences. He's not being difficult. He's communicating the only way he knows how. She paused, gathering her thoughts. For feeding, consistency is key, but so is flexibility. Some days he might want his bottle warmer, other days at room temperature. You have to read his cues. And for naps, the environment matters. Is the room too bright, too quiet? Some babies need white noise, others need complete silence. John's eyebrows rose. That's incredibly specific. What about diapers? Camille asked, and Paulina could hear the test in her voice. Brand matters less than fit and timing, Paulina replied without hesitation. But there are situations where you might want to skip them entirely. During diaper rash recovery, for example. Let the skin breathe. You have to be willing to adjust. The couple exchanged another look, and this time Paulina saw satisfaction in their silent communication. We both work demanding jobs, John said. Late nights are common. We need someone who can be here when we can't. Someone who won't just watch Casper, but really care for him. When can you start? Camille added, her voice carrying a note of hope. I'm ready whenever you need me, Paulina said, and meant it. The smile that spread across Camille's face was genuine. Then let's introduce you to Casper. They'd warned her it might take time, that Casper could be standoffish with new people. But when Paulina entered the nursery and saw the baby sitting up in his crib, something shifted inside her chest. His dark hair was mussed from his nap, his cheeks flushed pink, and when he saw her, he didn't cry or turn away. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with curious eyes. Hello, sweet boy, Paulina said softly, approaching the crib slowly. I'm Paulina. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Casper's face broke into a gummy smile, and he reached his arms up toward her. Behind her, Camille inhaled sharply. He's not with strangers. May I? Paulina asked, though Casper was already leaning toward her. Of course, Camille said, though her voice sounded strained. The moment Paulina lifted Casper from the crib, he settled against her as if he'd been waiting for her all his life. He babbled happily, his tiny hands grabbing at her hair, her necklace, anything within reach. She supported him naturally, bouncing him gently while humming under her breath. Casper gurgled, then looked directly at Paulina and grinned. The silence in the room was profound. Camille stood frozen, watching her son who had cried with 2 other nannies, who was cautious with new people, completely at ease with this stranger. He likes you, John said finally, his voice filled with wonder and perhaps something else Paulina couldn't identify. We like each other, Paulina replied, pressing a gentle kiss to Casper's forehead. Don't we, little one? The rest of the meeting was a blur of logistics. They showed her the small guest room that would be hers during overnight stays, went over schedules and emergency contacts, discussed pay, more than she'd made in her previous positions. Everything was falling into place exactly as she'd hoped. When can you start? Camille asked as they walked back to the living room. Tomorrow if you'd like, Paulina said, still holding Casper, who showed no interest in being put down. Perfect, John said, shaking her hand. We'll see you at 7 a.m. As Paulina drove home, she couldn't stop smiling. The job was perfect. Good pay, nice family, beautiful apartment, and a baby who had taken to her immediately. Some people might call it luck, but Paulina knew better. Everything was going according to plan. The dinner party at the Hendersons had run longer than expected. Camille glanced at her watch for the third time in 10 minutes, noting it was already past 8:30. She excused herself from the animated conversation about vacation plans and stepped into the hallway to call Paulina. I'm so sorry, she said, when Paulina answered on the second ring. We're running late. How's Casper doing? He's been a little fussy today. Paulina's voice came through clearly, professional as always. Nothing to worry about, though. I was thinking of giving him a bath to help him settle down for the night. That sounds perfect, Camille said, relief evident in her voice. He usually loves his baths. We should be home by 9:30 at the latest. Take your time, Paulina said warmly. We'll be just fine. After ending the call, Camille returned to the dining room where John was deep in conversation with their host about the latest developments in renewable energy. She caught his eye and mouthed, 9:30, receiving a nod in return. Having Paulina had been a godsend. For the first time in months, they could actually enjoy an evening out without constantly worrying about Casper. Back at the loft, Paulina set her phone down and looked at Casper, who was red-faced and fussing in his bouncy seat. She'd tried everything, feeding, changing, playing soft music, even taking him out to the balcony for fresh air. Nothing had worked. He'd been cranky all afternoon, fighting his nap and rejecting his bottle. Come on, sweet boy, she said, lifting him from the seat. Let's get you cleaned up and maybe that'll help you feel better. She carried him to the bathroom, speaking in the soothing, sing-song voice that usually calmed him. You know what? I think you need some special water treatment. That always works magic, doesn't it? Casper's crying subsided slightly at the sound of her voice, though he still squirmed in her arms. Paulina ran the water in the baby bathtub, testing the temperature with her elbow the way she'd done many times before. There we go, she murmured, supporting Casper against her shoulder while she made final adjustments to the water temperature. This is going to feel so good, I promise. She laid him on the changing pad and began undressing him, her movements practiced and efficient. Off came the tiny striped shirt, then the onesie underneath. Casper's crying had quieted to occasional whimpers, as if he sensed relief was coming. Almost ready for your spa treatment, Paulina said, reaching for the tabs on his diaper. You're going to feel so much... The words died in her throat. There, on the right side of Casper's back, just below his shoulder blade, was a small crescent-shaped birthmark. Faint, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, but unmistakable once you'd seen it. The washcloth slipped from Paulina's trembling fingers, landing with a soft splash in the bathwater. Her breath caught, then came in short, sharp gasps as she stared at the mark she had traced with her fingertip in those precious few hours before saying goodbye. Her heart stopped, then hammered against her ribs as months of carefully constructed emotional walls crumbled in an instant. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. Joy and grief crashed over her in equal measure, a drowning wave of love she thought she'd buried mixed with the searing guilt of wondering if she'd made the right choice. Her hands froze in the warm bathwater, fighting the primal urge to scoop her son up and never let go, while her mind reeled between desperate denial and the undeniable truth written in every familiar curve of the baby's face. How had she not seen it before? How had she managed to convince herself that the shape of his eyes, the way his hair grew in a stubborn cowlick, the exact shade of his skin, how had she explained all of it away as coincidence? "Oh, God," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, God, Casper." At the sound of his name, the baby looked up at her with those dark eyes, her eyes, and smiled. The same smile that had broken her heart months ago when she'd held him for the last time, memorizing every feature before the social worker had gently taken him away. Her son, her baby, the child she had carried for 9 months, delivered alone in a hospital 2 states away, and given up because she was 19 and scared and had nothing to offer him but love. The child who had been placed with a wonderful family, she'd been told, people who could give him everything she couldn't. She didn't know their names. John and Camille Matthews, the couple who had adopted her baby and now unknowingly employed his birth mother as their nanny. Paulina's hands shook as she reached for him, muscle memory taking over as she carefully lifted Casper and held him against her chest. He settled immediately, his tiny hand fisting in her shirt, and she realized with crystal clarity that this was why he had bonded with her so quickly, why he felt safe in her arms. On some level, he remembered. On some level, he knew. "I'm here," she whispered into his soft hair, tears streaming down her face. "Mama's here." The words felt like coming home and committing a crime all at once. She was his mother, but she wasn't his mother. She had given up that right, signed those papers, made that choice. But holding him now, feeling his warm weight against her chest, she wondered if some bonds were too strong to be severed by legal documents. The bathwater was growing cold, and she knew she had to pull herself together before John and Camille returned. But for just a moment longer, she allowed herself to hold her son, to whisper all the things she'd never been able to say, to let herself feel the love she'd spent 6 months trying to forget. Everything was going according to plan, she'd thought just days ago, but she'd been wrong. The warm weight of Casper in her arms triggered a cascade of memories that Paulina had spent months trying to suppress. As she held him close, the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her past began to crumble, each memory cutting deeper than the last. She was 8 years old again, hiding in her bedroom closet while her parents screamed at each other in the living room. The sound of breaking glass, another bottle thrown against the wall, followed by her mother's sobs and her father's slurred curses. The electricity had been shut off again because they'd spent the utility money on whiskey and beer. She'd learned to do her homework by candlelight, to make meals from whatever canned goods she could find in the back of the cupboard, to stay invisible when the fighting got too loud. "Rags, hey, Rags!" The voices of her high school classmates echoed in her memory as she unconsciously smoothed Casper's soft cotton onesie. The same threadbare jeans she'd worn for 2 years running, the sweater with holes in the elbows that she'd tried to hide with safety pins. The humiliation of free lunch tickets, of pretending she wasn't hungry when there was no food at home, of watching other kids get picked up by parents who were sober and present. Her parents had been ghosts in her life, physically there but emotionally absent, lost in their own haze of addiction and dysfunction. She'd raised herself, really, counting down the days until she could escape the suffocating poverty that had defined her childhood. 18. Freedom. She'd walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on her back. A beat-up Honda Civic she'd bought for $500 from a neighbor's yard sale, and $300 she'd saved from her part-time job at the local diner. The car had been her home for almost a year, parked behind the grocery store where she worked the overnight shift stocking shelves. The YMCA had become her sanctuary. $5 for a day pass that included a shower, a place to brush her teeth, to feel human again. She'd perfected the art of living invisibly, of making herself small and unremarkable so no one would ask questions about why she was always there, why she never seemed to go home. But she'd been reliable, punctual, desperate enough to work harder than anyone else because she had no safety net to fall back on. When Mr. Novak, the store manager, had offered her the night supervisor position, she'd nearly cried with relief. The extra $2 an hour had been enough to rent a tiny studio apartment with Lisa, a single mother who needed help with rent and childcare. That apartment had been a palace compared to the car. She'd slept on an air mattress in the corner of the living room, but it had been hers. She'd had a key, an address, a place to receive mail. She'd been someone, even if she was still barely scraping by. Mike had appeared in her life like a mirror of her own struggles. She'd found him sleeping in his car in the same parking lot where she'd spent so many nights, and something about his quiet desperation had called to her. He'd been sweet then, grateful for her help, full of plans for the future they could build together. Two people who understood what it meant to have nothing, who could appreciate the small victories of a steady paycheck and a roof over their heads. "We're going to make it," he'd whispered to her on those nights when they'd held each other on the air mattress, planning their escape from poverty. "We're going to have everything we never had." She'd believed him. More than that, she'd believed in them. When she'd missed her period, when the 2 pink lines had appeared on the test she'd bought at the dollar store, she'd felt a flutter of hope alongside the terror. Maybe this was how families were supposed to start, with 2 people who had nothing but each other, who wanted something better for their child than what they'd had. But Mike had looked at her like she'd just told him she had a terminal illness. "I can't do this," he'd said, already backing toward the door. "I can barely take care of myself, Paulina. I can't be responsible for a kid." "We can figure it out," she'd pleaded, following him to the parking lot. "We can make it work. People do it all the time with less than we have." "No." His voice had been cold, final. "I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready to be a father." She'd watched him drive away in that same beat-up car where she'd first found him, and she'd known with horrible certainty that she was alone again. More alone than she'd ever been, because now she had someone else depending on her. Terminating the pregnancy had never been an option. Not because of any moral stance, but because of something deeper. A fierce, protective love that had bloomed the moment she'd seen those pink lines. This baby would be wanted, even if its father couldn't see past his own fear. This baby would be loved, even if she had to do it alone. But love, she'd learned, wasn't enough to keep the lights on or put food on the table. The pregnancy had been difficult, the birth traumatic and lonely. She'd held Casper for the first time in a hospital room with no flowers, no balloons, no proud partner taking pictures. Just her and this perfect, tiny human who deserved so much more than she could give him. Those first 3 months had been a blur of sleepless nights and mounting bills. She'd tried to work, but childcare cost more than she earned. She'd tried to manage without it, but a baby couldn't come to the grocery store at midnight. She'd watched her savings dwindle, her options disappear, her son's needs grow more complex while her ability to meet them shrank. The decision to place him for adoption had felt like tearing her heart out while it was still beating. She'd interviewed families, read profiles, sat in the agency's sterile office while they explained the process. Her only requirement had been simple: a financially stable family who could give him everything she couldn't. Education, opportunities, a future that wasn't defined by struggle and want. She'd held him one last time at the agency, memorizing every detail, the way his hair swirled in a cowlick, the tiny crescent birthmark on his back, the way he gripped her finger with his whole fist. She'd whispered promises she knew she couldn't keep, apologies for a choice that felt like the ultimate betrayal of maternal love. "I'm doing this because I love you," she told him, tears streaming down her face. "Someday, when you're older, I hope you'll understand." The months after had been the darkest of her life. She'd lost her job when the grief made it impossible to function. She'd lost her apartment when she couldn't pay rent. She'd found herself back in her car, but this time the hollowness inside her was more devastating than any physical discomfort. She remembered the police officer who'd knocked on her window that night, a kind-faced man in his 50s who'd asked if she was okay before telling her she couldn't sleep there. He'd probably seen dozens of people like her, maybe hundreds. Just another casualty of circumstances beyond her control. The idea to become a nanny had come from desperation disguised as inspiration. She'd thought that being around children might fill the void her son had left, might make the grief manageable. She'd thrown herself into learning everything she could about childcare, about development and nutrition and safety. She'd become the nanny she'd needed when she was struggling alone. But she'd never imagined this. She'd never dared to hope that the universe might be cruel enough or kind enough to bring her back to her own child. Now, standing in this beautiful bathroom in a home worth more than she'd ever dreamed of owning, holding the son she'd given up to give him a better life, Paulina felt the full weight of cosmic irony. He was safe, loved, provided for, everything she'd wanted for him. And she was here, getting paid to care for him, close enough to watch him grow but forever separated by the choice she'd made. The sound of the front door opening downstairs made her jump. John and Camille were home. "Paulina!" Camille's voice drifted up from the living room. "How did everything go?" Paulina looked down at Casper, who was gazing up at her with those familiar dark eyes, and felt her heart break all over again. She had to pull herself together, had to be the professional nanny they'd hired, had to pretend that holding this baby wasn't simultaneously the most natural and most devastating thing in the world. "Just fine," she called back, her voice remarkably steady. "He's ready for his bath." But as she lowered Casper into the warm water, watching him splash and smile, she knew that nothing about this situation was fine. Nothing about it ever would be. After John and Camille had gone to bed, Paulina found herself alone with Casper in the softly lit living room. The baby had been fussy again, and she'd offered to take the night shift, claiming he might sleep better if she walked with him for a while. They'd gratefully accepted, exhausted from their long day. Now, as she held her son in the quiet sanctuary of the dimmed apartment, tears began streaming down her face. All the emotions she'd suppressed during the evening, the shock, the joy, the overwhelming love, came pouring out in silent sobs that shook her entire body. "My sweet boy," she whispered, settling into the plush armchair by the window. "Mama's here. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. I'm so sorry." Casper gazed up at her with those dark eyes, his tiny hand reaching up to touch her wet cheek as if he could sense her distress. The gesture broke her heart all over again. "You don't know how much I've missed you," she continued, her voice barely audible. "Every single day since I said goodbye, I've wondered if you were okay, if you were happy, if you knew how much I loved you. I used to lie awake at night imagining what you might look like as you grew, what your first smile would be like, what your voice would sound like when you learned to laugh." She traced the outline of his face with her fingertip, memorizing every detail just as she had in the hospital months ago. "I thought about your first Christmas, your first birthday, all the milestones I would miss. I told myself it was worth it because you would have everything I couldn't give you, a stable home, 2 parents who could provide for you, opportunities I never had." Casper made a soft cooing sound and Paulina's heart swelled with bittersweet joy. "And look at you now. You're so healthy, so happy. John and Camille love you so much. I can see it in everything they do. They're good people, sweet boy. They're the parents I wanted you to have." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd chosen the Matthews family from a portfolio of prospective parents, drawn to their stability, their obvious desire for a child, their ability to provide everything she couldn't. She'd never imagined she'd end up here, in their home, witnessing firsthand how right her choice had been. "They take such good care of you," she murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Your nursery is beautiful. You have more toys than I ever dreamed of, and they read to you every night." Do you know how lucky that makes you? Do you know how special you are? As the hours passed, she told him everything. About the months after his birth, about living in her car again, about the grief that had nearly consumed her. She told him about choosing to become a nanny, about how she thought caring for other children would have helped heal the hole in her heart, even though nothing could ever truly fill it. "I never expected this," she whispered, as dawn began to creep through the windows. "I never thought I'd see you again, let alone get to hold you like this. It feels like a miracle and a curse all at once." By the time she finally put him back in his crib, Paulina's heart was full of a peace she hadn't felt in months. Seeing him thriving, knowing he was loved and secure, it validated every painful moment of her decision. But as she drove home to her trailer, reality began to set in. What was she doing? How could she continue this charade, knowing what she knew? Every day she stayed was a lie, a betrayal of the trust John and Camille had placed in her. The ethical weight of the situation pressed down on her like a physical force. She was living a deception, getting paid to care for her own biological child while his adoptive parents remained oblivious to the truth. It was wrong on every level, no matter how much she loved being near him. Over the next few days, Paulina wrestled with an impossible decision. Should she tell John and Camille the truth? Part of her imagined their shock, their probable anger, their likely demand that she leave immediately. But another part wondered if they might understand, might even find a way to make the situation work. Number that was fantasy. The truth would shatter their sense of security, make them question everything about the adoption process, about her motives, about whether they could trust her. It would turn their joy into suspicion and paranoia. She had to leave. It was the only ethical choice, the only way to preserve the family dynamic she'd worked so hard to create for Casper. But the thought of walking away from him again, of missing his milestones and watching him grow from a distance, felt like dying. Finally, she reached a compromise with her conscience. 1 more week. She would give herself 7 more days to memorize his laugh, to witness his daily discoveries, to store up enough memories to last a lifetime. Then she would resign, make up some excuse about a family emergency or another job opportunity, and disappear from their lives forever. The break-in had happened on a Tuesday evening while the family was at Camille's sister's house for dinner. They'd returned home to find the front door ajar, the alarm system disabled, and several valuable items missing. The 65-inch television from the living room, Camille's jewelry box from the bedroom, and John's laptop from his home office. But what devastated Camille most was the theft of her grandmother's gold ring, a delicate band with tiny diamonds that had been passed down through 3 generations. "It's not about the money," she'd sobbed to John as they waited for the police to arrive. "That ring is irreplaceable. It's all I have left of her." The officers had been professional, but not particularly optimistic. Break-ins in upscale neighborhoods were becoming more common, they explained, and recovery rates for stolen jewelry were discouragingly low. However, they were fortunate to have an extensive security camera system that might provide crucial evidence. John had installed the cameras 6 months earlier when Camille was pregnant, wanting to ensure their home would be as secure as possible for their growing family. The system covered every room except the bathrooms and bedrooms, with motion-activated recording that captured everything in high definition. The perpetrator was wearing a mask, Officer Martinez had noted after reviewing the initial footage, but we'll analyze the build, gait patterns, and any other identifying features. Sometimes these cases break open from the smallest details. Now, 3 days later, Camille sat at John's desk in the home office, methodically scrolling through hours of surveillance footage from the past week. The police had focused on the day of the break-in, but she wanted to review everything, hoping to spot something they might have missed. Perhaps the burglar had cased the house earlier, or there might be other suspicious activity. She fast-forwarded through the mundane daily routines, Paulina arriving each morning, feeding Casper, playing with him in the living room, putting him down for naps. The footage showed a competent, caring nanny going about her duties professionally. But then Camille saw something that made her stop the video and rewind. It was from the evening, when she and John had been at their dinner party. The timestamp showed 9:47 p.m., well after Casper's usual bedtime. Paulina was in the living room, holding Casper in the armchair by the window, and she was crying. Camille's eyes widened as she turned up the volume and leaned closer to the screen. Paulina wasn't just comforting a fussy baby. She was talking to him, whispering things that no nanny, no matter how caring, would say to a child in her care. "My sweet boy," Paulina's voice came through the speakers, barely audible but unmistakably tender. "I'm so sorry I had to leave you." Camille's hand flew to her mouth. She watched, transfixed, as Paulina continued talking to Casper, her words becoming increasingly intimate and personal. The way Paulina held Casper was different from how she'd held him during the day when John and Camille were home. This wasn't professional caregiving. This was something deeper, more primal. Her entire body curved around the baby protectively, possessively, like she was shielding him from the world. And then Camille saw something that made her heart stop. Casper had begun to fuss, turning his head and making the rooting motions that indicated he was hungry. But instead of preparing a bottle, Paulina looked down at him with an expression of such longing that it was painful to watch. The baby stretched toward her chest, his tiny mouth seeking, and Paulina's face crumpled. "I wish I could," Paulina whispered, her voice breaking. "I wish I could give you what you need, what you remember. But I can't. Not anymore." She started to lift her shirt, then stopped, her hands trembling. For a moment she just held Casper against her chest, rocking him while tears streamed down her face. Then she seemed to catch herself, pulling back and reaching for the bottle she'd prepared earlier. Camille had seen everything. The instinctive maternal response, the intimate knowledge of Casper's needs, the heartbreak in Paulina's eyes when she realized she couldn't nurse him. The footage continued, showing Paulina talking to Casper for hours, telling him about her life, about choices she'd made, about how much she loved him. And then, near dawn, came the words that sent ice through Camille's veins. "I have to go away soon, sweet boy. I can't stay here anymore. It's not right, and it's not fair to your family." Camille paused the video, her mind reeling. With shaking hands, Camille grabbed her phone and speed-dialed John's number. "I need you to come home," she said the moment he answered. "Right now. There's something on the security footage you need to see." "Is it about the break-in? Did you find something?" "No," Camille said, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's about Paulina. John, I don't know what I think. Just come home. Please." 20 minutes later, John was sitting beside her at the desk, watching the same footage with growing alarm. They rewound it several times, analyzing every word, every gesture, every expression on Paulina's face. "This doesn't make sense," John said finally. "She's talking to him like she's his mother," Camille finished, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. There were dozens of moments when Paulina thought she was unobserved, times when she would hold Casper just a little too long, speak to him just a little too intimately, look at him with an intensity that went far beyond professional care. The way she instinctively knew exactly how to soothe him when he was fussy, how she seemed to anticipate his needs before he even expressed them, how he settled in her arms with a contentment that now seemed loaded with meaning. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling over them like a suffocating blanket. "What do we do?" Camille asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if she's planning to take him? What if she's some kind of... what do they call it? A baby snatcher?" Something nagged at John. Paulina's behavior in the videos didn't look predatory or calculating. It looked heartbroken. It looked like a woman saying goodbye to something precious she was about to lose. It looked disturbingly like love. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that usually made Camille feel energized and optimistic. Today, however, she sat at the kitchen table nursing her third cup of coffee, her stomach in knots as she waited for Paulina's arrival. John had taken the day off work so they could confront their nanny together about what they'd discovered in the security footage. They'd spent the previous evening rehearsing their approach, trying to find the right balance between concern and accusation. Neither of them had slept well, and the weight of their suspicions hung heavy in the apartment like smoke. "She should be here by now," John said, checking his watch for the fifth time. It was 7:30 a.m., and Paulina was never late. Camille's phone buzzed with a text notification. Her heart jumped, expecting an explanation for the delay, but the message was from her sister asking about weekend plans. "Nothing from her," she said, showing John the screen. By 8 a.m., they were both pacing. John tried calling Paulina's number, but it went straight to voicemail. The recorded message was generic, professional. "You've reached Paulina Rivera. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." "This isn't like her," Camille said, bouncing Casper on her hip. The baby was fussy, probably sensing the tension in the air, or perhaps missing his routine with Paulina. "She's never missed a day without calling ahead." It was John who found the letter, tucked under the doormat, folded neatly in half with John and Camille, written across the front in Paulina's careful handwriting. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the single sheet of paper and read aloud. "Dear John and Camille, I am so sorry to leave you like this, but urgent family matters have come up that require my immediate attention. I know this puts you in a difficult position, and I deeply regret any inconvenience this may cause. Please know that caring for Casper has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. He is an extraordinary child, and I have no doubt he will grow up to be a good man with a bright future ahead of him. You are wonderful parents, patient, loving, and devoted. Casper is incredibly lucky to have you both. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me for leaving so suddenly. Sometimes life forces us to make difficult choices, and this is one of those times. Take care of yourselves and give Casper an extra hug from me. With sincere gratitude, Paulina." The letter felt like a confession and an apology rolled into one. Camille read it twice, searching for hidden meanings in every word. "Family matters," she repeated skeptically. "What family?" She told us she didn't have anyone. 200 miles away, Paulina sat in her car on the shoulder of Highway 52, tears streaming down her face as she gripped the steering wheel. The same beat-up Honda Civic that had been her home before, her refuge when she had nowhere else to go, now carried her away from the most precious thing in her world. She'd left before dawn, unable to face another goodbye with Casper, unable to look John and Camille in the eye, knowing what she'd discovered. The letter had taken her an hour to write, each word carefully chosen to express gratitude without revealing the truth. The silence around her was complete, except for the occasional car passing by on the highway. She closed her eyes and tilted her head back against the headrest, feeling the weight of starting over once again pressing down on her like a physical force. "Give me strength," she whispered to the empty sky, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Please just give me the strength to keep going." She thought about her dreams, the ones she'd harbored since childhood of escaping the cycle of poverty that had defined her family. She'd let those dreams get buried under survival, under grief, under the crushing weight of circumstance. But sitting here now, with nothing left to lose, she felt a spark of determination flickering back to life. She was 20 years old. She was smart, capable, hardworking. She'd proven that by surviving everything life had thrown at her so far. Maybe it was time to stop just surviving and start building something better. "I'm going to get educated," she said aloud, the words gaining strength as she spoke them. "I'm going to stop feeling sorry for myself and make something of my life. For him. For me." She started the car and pulled back onto the highway, not sure where she was going, but certain that she was moving towards something better. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store cast harsh shadows across the produce section as Paulina restocked the apple display for the third time that morning. A week had passed since she'd fled the Matthews home, and she was slowly settling into the rhythm of her new life. The pay was barely enough to cover her rent and groceries, but it was honest work, and it kept her hands busy enough that her mind couldn't wander too often to thoughts of Casper. She'd found a small studio apartment above a diner on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, but it had running water, electricity that stayed on, and most importantly, it was hers. The shrill ring of her phone cut through the ambient noise of the store. Paulina glanced at the display. Unknown number, probably a telemarketer. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Hello? Is this Paulina Rivera? The voice was professional, familiar but distant. Yes, this is her. This is Sandra Morrison from Family Bridges Adoption Services. We spoke several times during your son's placement process last year. Paulina's blood turned to ice. Her hand tightened around the phone so hard her knuckles went white. Yes, I remember you. I'm calling because the adoptive parents of your son have requested contact information for you. They say it's important, and they would very much like to speak with you. The apple in Paulina's other hand dropped to the floor and rolled under the display case. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so hard she was sure Sandra could hear it through the phone. I don't understand, she managed to whisper. Is something wrong with him? Is he okay? Oh, no, Sandra said quickly. Nothing like that. They simply requested your contact information and asked that I reach out to see if you'd be willing to speak with them. They left their phone number and asked you to call at your convenience. Paulina leaned against the apple display for support, her legs suddenly feeling like they couldn't hold her weight. What if I don't want to? What if I say no? That's entirely your right, Sandra assured her. You're under no obligation to maintain contact. The adoption was closed as you requested, but if you're willing, I can give you their number. With trembling fingers, Paulina fumbled for a pen in her apron pocket and wrote down the number Sandra recited. She stared at the digits on the back of a receipt, knowing that this string of numbers was a bridge back to the life she'd just walked away from. After Sandra hung up, Paulina stood frozen in the produce section, oblivious to the customers moving around her. They knew. Somehow, John and Camille had figured out who she was and now they wanted to talk to her. Were they angry? Were they going to threaten her? Report her to the police for some kind of fraud? She spent the rest of her shift in a daze, mechanically going through the motions of stocking shelves and helping customers while her mind churned with possibilities. By the time she got home to her small apartment, she'd convinced herself that calling would only make things worse. But the number burned in her pocket like a brand. Around midnight, after pacing her apartment for hours, she finally dialed. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Paulina's throat closed up. She recognized Camille's voice immediately, but couldn't force words past the lump in her throat. Hello? Camille said again, more gently this time. Is this Paulina? Still, Paulina couldn't speak. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. It's okay, Camille said, her voice infinitely kind. Everything is okay. I know this must be overwhelming for you. We just wanted to talk to you. Could we meet somewhere? Just to talk? The coffee shop Camille had suggested was neutral territory. A small cafe in the downtown area, busy enough to provide cover but quiet enough for conversation. Paulina arrived first, choosing a corner table where she could see the entrance, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she was too nervous to drink. When Camille walked in, Paulina's breath caught. She looked exactly the same as she had a week ago, but there was something different in her expression. Softer, more vulnerable. She spotted Paulina immediately and approached the table with careful, measured steps. Thank you for coming, Camille said as she sat down. I wasn't sure you would. Paulina finally found her voice. I almost didn't. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. before Camille leaned forward slightly. I want to start by apologizing for invading your privacy, for looking into your background without telling you. We were worried about Casper, and we saw some things on our security cameras that, well, that made us curious. What did you see? Paulina asked, though she suspected she already knew. You, talking to him, holding him, the way you looked at him. Camille's voice grew soft. I've never seen anything more motherly. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Paulina felt tears prick at her eyes. I tried to be professional. I tried to keep my distance. I know you did. And I want you to know that we don't think you did anything wrong. When we realized who you were, everything suddenly made sense. The way he responded to you, how natural you were with him, how much you seemed to love him. Camille paused, gathering her thoughts. John and I never planned to have biological children. We always knew we wanted to adopt, to give a home to a child who needed one. But seeing you with Casper, seeing how much you loved him and how hard it must have been for you to leave him again. She wiped away a tear. It changed something in me. What do you mean? Paulina whispered. Tell me your story, Camille said gently. Tell me what led you to place Casper for adoption. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I'd like to understand. So Paulina told her. Everything. The poverty, the dysfunction of her childhood, meeting Mike and believing they could build something together, the terror of being pregnant and alone, the impossibility of caring for Casper on her own. She talked about sleeping in her car, about living on air mattresses and day-old bread, about making the hardest decision of her life because she loved her son too much to watch him suffer. By the time she finished, both women were crying. I chose you and John because I could see how much you wanted a child, Paulina said, her voice breaking. I could see that you would give him everything I couldn't, stability, security, a future. I never regretted that choice, even when it nearly destroyed me. Camille reached across the table and took her hand. John and I talked about this for days after you left. We talked about what kind of people we want to be, what kind of family we want to have. And we realized something important. She squeezed Paulina's hand gently. Casper doesn't have to lose his birth mother to have adoptive parents. If you want, and only if you want, we'd like to help you get back on your feet. We'd like to help you be part of his life. We have the resources to support you while you get educated. Find stable work. Build the life you want for yourself and for him. Paulina stared at her in disbelief. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want your son back, we'll help make that happen. We'll be there for both of you, as family, as support, as whatever you need us to be. John and I have talked about this extensively. We can't bear the thought of you having to stay away from Casper when it's clear how much you both need each other. The words hit Paulina like a physical blow. She pulled her hand back and pressed it to her chest, trying to process what she was hearing. You would do that? You would give him back? We would help you take him back, Camille corrected gently. He's your son, Paulina. He always has been. We've just been taking care of him until you were ready. Paulina broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands as the weight of 6 months of grief and guilt and desperate love finally found release. Camille moved to the chair beside her, wrapping her arms around her shoulders and holding her while she cried. I never thought, Paulina gasped between sobs. I never imagined anyone would understand. I never thought I'd see him again, let alone. You don't have to decide anything right now, Camille whispered. Take time to think about it. But know that whatever you choose, John and I are here for you. You're not alone anymore. For the first time since she'd signed those adoption papers, Paulina felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The mortarboard felt strange and wonderful perched on Paulina's head as she walked across the university stage to receive her diploma. Bachelor of Science in Early Childhood Development, words that had once seemed as impossible as reaching the moon. As the dean shook her hand and placed the leather folder in her palm, she caught sight of her cheering section in the audience. Casper, now 4.5, was bouncing in his seat between Camille and John, clapping his hands with uninhibited joy. "That's my mama," he called out, his voice carrying over the polite applause of other families. Camille was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while John beamed with pride that rivaled any biological parent. This unconventional family had become Paulina's anchor, her foundation for building the life she'd always dreamed of. What had started as an impossible situation had somehow transformed into the greatest blessing any of them could have imagined. John and Camille hadn't just helped her get Casper back, they'd essentially adopted her too, becoming the parents she'd never had. They'd guided her through the process of re-enrolling in school, helped her find a small house just 3 blocks from their loft, and provided the emotional and financial support that allowed her to focus on her studies while raising Casper. "We're investing in our grandson's future," John had said when Paulina tried to refuse their help with tuition, "and in his mother's happiness." Now, 4 years later, Paulina had a full-time job as a program coordinator at a children's development centre, her own house with a real garden where Casper could play, and most importantly, the confidence that came from knowing she'd kept her promise to herself. She had escaped poverty. She had become someone. 6 months after Paulina's graduation, Camille called with news that left everyone speechless. "I'm pregnant," she announced during their weekly family dinner, her voice a mixture of wonder and disbelief. At 46, Camille had long assumed that biological parenthood wasn't in her future. The pregnancy was unexpected, challenging, but ultimately joyful. When baby Emma arrived, healthy and perfect, Paulina watched Camille hold her daughter for the first time and saw her own journey reflected in the older woman's eyes. "I understand now," Camille whispered to Paulina in the hospital room. "I understand what you went through, what you felt. The love is so immediate, so overwhelming." "It changes everything, doesn't it?" Paulina replied, gently stroking Emma's tiny hand. Their friendship had evolved into something even deeper than family. Despite their age difference, Camille often sought Paulina's advice about motherhood, recognizing her expertise not just from her degree, but from her lived experience. "I can't believe I'm asking my former nanny for parenting tips," Camille would laugh, but there was deep respect in her voice. Paulina loved babysitting Emma whenever she could, marveling at the circular nature of their relationship. "You're still taking care of my children," Camille would tease, but they both understood the profound gift they'd given each other, the chance to mother and be mothered in ways none of them had expected. Casper thrived in this environment of love and support. The private school that Paulina could now afford with her promotion challenged him academically, while the security of having multiple adults invested in his success gave him confidence to excel. He was graduating from elementary school with honours, already showing signs of the analytical mind John had predicted and the creative spirit Camille had recognised. The graduation ceremony was held in the school's beautiful auditorium, filled with proud families. When Casper's name was called as valedictorian, Paulina felt her heart might burst with pride. He approached the podium with poise remarkable for an 11-year-old, adjusting the microphone before beginning his speech. "Teachers, families, and fellow graduates," he began, his voice clear and confident. "Today we celebrate not just what we've learned, but the people who helped us learn it. I want to talk about something that makes my family special." Paulina exchanged glances with Camille and John, wondering what he would say. "It so happened in my life that I have 2 mothers," Casper continued, his eyes finding Paulina in the audience. "My birth mother, who gave me life and fought to build a future where she could raise me, and my adoptive mother, who took care of me when my birth mother couldn't, and who helped bring us back together." The auditorium fell completely silent, captivated by this young boy's mature understanding of his unique situation. "I also have a father who taught me that families aren't just about biology. They're about choice, commitment, and love. And I have a little sister who reminds me every day that the best things in life are worth waiting for." His voice grew stronger as he reached his conclusion. Some people think having divorced parents or step-families is complicated, but I think having multiple people who love you just means you're extra lucky. I'm standing here today because 4 adults decided to put aside what was easy and do what was right. They chose love over fear, cooperation over conflict, and family over everything else. He paused, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Mama Paulina, thank you for being brave enough to give me up and brave enough to take me back. Mama Camille and Papa John, thank you for showing me that love multiplies rather than divides. And Emma, thank you for making our family complete. As applause thundered through the auditorium, Paulina felt tears streaming down her face. John reached over and squeezed her hand while Camille did the same from the other side. In the front row, baby Emma clapped her chubby hands, not understanding the words but sensing the joy. This was what family looked like, Paulina realized. Not the dysfunction of her childhood or the traditional nuclear family she'd once thought she needed to provide for Casper. This beautiful, complicated, chosen family that had grown from tragedy into triumph, from separation into unity, from fear into love. As they all stood to give Casper a standing ovation, Paulina knew that the scared 19-year-old girl who had once slept in her car and given up her baby would be amazed by this moment. That girl had dreamed of escaping poverty and becoming someone. She had become so much more. She had become herself,